I'm the person, one of the gentlemen without a tie in the audience. And that's because I provide advice to those people that wear ties and who take the responsibility for actually making decisions. So as we begin to think through the next few days and what we've been hearing, I like to think in terms of how we treat science, how we think about it, and what it means from the standpoint of the people that we've heard. I'm the Senior Advisor for Climate Research, and I run a Drought Center at NOAA. But what I'm here to talk about is something everybody in this room is part of, which is change. And the reason why I put up this particular figure is because it shows a dawn. And the change I'm talking about is not the change only in the climate, but the change in which we've seen the world come together over time. And not just the world, people in our villages. I grew up in a small island called Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. I work within the US, and we work on issues that span those two types of countries. So let's begin to think through this. Some of you know this figure. I like to show the past, simply because we are talking about the future. But as we know, in the past, we've created changes. And at each point in time, we are creating changes into the future, whether they be constraining or enabling future risk and future vulnerability. When you see those trends begin to go up or down as they matter, you have to ask what was happening at that time. What was it that we were learning? And how did the actions and all of the things we've heard this morning shaped the present that we have at this time? So as we begin to think through this, I think it's really critical that we understand the role not only of science, but what it means in a small d democratic society in the way we think. I come from a village of 400 people, very, very small village. A lot of very fascinating, very strong minds there. So this figure comes directly out of the Special Report on Extremes. I was one of the authors with many people in this room. We know that a changing climate leads to changes in weather and climate extremes. It always has. But what is changing at the moment? As you can see from the figure I showed previously, the rates at which changes are occurring are in fact faster than the rates at which we're not simply changing our institutions, but even faster than the rates in which many of our traditions have changed and adapted over time. Why is that important? Because we're embedded in our traditions. Anyone, whether you're a scientist, whether or not, whichever field you're from, whether or not you work in a small village, whether you carry water, we're embedded in the lessons that we've had over time. And the question is, how adaptive are our adaptations? So let's think through this. I like to show the world at night just to show that we have opportunities for thinking about a new dawn. Throughout the world, we've had several reports. Kathy Jacobs is in the room. She led the U.S. National Assessment. We've done work around the world in terms of the Caribbean, certainly in East Africa, in the Philippines and elsewhere. And you can find reports like these around the world. But as you heard this morning, they try to get us a sense of these very, very complex actions and the science behind those in which people have been engaged. And one of the things I like to say, with the role of science, we should not be in the position of helping people do the wrong thing with better information. This approach we've taken to science actually misses the epistemological uncertainty. Are we doing the right thing? And not simply rushing to do anything. So let's think through this. A figure from the Special Report and from the Fifth Assessment asks us, what are the pathways that lower resilience? What are the climate resilient pathways? And every one of us in this room has shaped the direction of choice, whether it's from communities, whether it's from nations, or the private sector, on trying to choose climate resilient pathways. But there's a famous Chinese proverb I always like to put up, which is, if we're not careful, we'll end up where we're going. And the reason why I put that up is that it is secure. It is secure to end up where we're going. And the reason why that is we ask the question, why do we put people into places of risk and then wonder why we return them to places of risk? Because we have to recover livelihoods. There's a near-term response. And when we ask people to move, I always like to ask people, they say, let's be proactive. I say, yeah, let's be proactive, you first. The choices carry risks. And it's easy to make these recommendations when we do not have to bear those risks. There's a picture from California. You'll hear lots about the drought. That is a real picture at the edges of the desert. And we asked the question, if only we could assess the future risks with greater certainty. Really? Really? The human mind is wonderfully brilliant. Give us a complex problem, and sooner or later we will solve it. It's the obvious that takes us a little longer to realize. So let us think through these problems and ask what are the dependencies in the way and the choices in which we've developed, and whether or not the problems ahead of us are amenable to those decisions, actions, and lessons that we have learned. And I'm going to argue that we're still applying those lessons in the context of change. We have a strong risk of underestimating the complexity of adaptation. As you heard from Christina, the issue is about people. It's about individuals. It's about their livelihoods. That is not a straightforward question. Yet we've learned over time, the education, as someone was saying, I think yesterday, said, I'll quote from Ghana, when you educate a woman, you educate a village. When you educate a man, you just got him. There's a lot to this, right? Especially from the standpoint of small communities. So let's think through this. There's a picture I like to show. It comes from Peter Glick, some work that's been done in water. There's that split around 1975, US water withdrawals and US GDP. Why is this important? It says that everything the people are doing in this room can indeed make a difference. We have this notion on a personal and on a political level that upfront actions require costs, require some sort of sacrifice that we must make, and we use that as a barrier for making decisions. This can be done for carbon, we've done it for energy, basically showing that efficient technology, behavioral changes, do not necessarily lead to losses of economic competitiveness. This is a myth we have before us, and it's not simply saying, wow, there are trade-offs between the economy and the environment, and we'll try to make those. There are cases in which we can show clearly that, in fact, productivity increases while efficiency and, in the case of water, equity increases. The most fundamental adaptation question facing us is not what to do. How often should we revise our assumptions about the changing nature in the world? This is the fundamental adaptation question. So we move from planning to implementation. This is where we ask the folks in the room, bring the many minds of the world together. Ensuring resilient economies, supporting community livability, promoting environmental resilience. And we have aggregated cases in each of those, but now we have to disaggregate them in the way Christina described, down to why are people better off for engaging in this intellectual exercise? How do we put the pieces together? And then what does it mean? So from that standpoint, and I was glad Mr. Thiaw mentioned the UN International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction in one of the reports, the Global Assessment Report in 2011, in which I was involved. We asked the question, where do we go with climate risk governance? How do we ensure political authority, policy coherence, develop a culture of partnership? And I'll argue, and this will be heresy in our room, that issues of co-production actually need to be rethought in terms of how we work with communities. And I'll tell you why in a sec. We decentralize step by step. But co-production is not just sharing data. It is letting people understand that we share their risks and their responsibilities. One of the things I've been fortunate to have helped develop around the world are research groups, interdisciplinary research collaborations that exist in the places of risk, not studying someone somewhere else about what they ought to do. It gets us at accountability and efficiency. Adaptation, yes, is most efficient locally, but standards of practice have to be national, have to be regional, so that we agree on the successes and we can transfer them and learn from each other on how action ought to take place. So governance is critical. We all know that, but what does it mean? I lead something with Albert Klein Tank from KNMI here, the Climate Services Information System, a notion of climate risk management that says, how do we get information into the hands of people who are most at risk, and how do we help them gain the capacity to use that information. Complex task requiring cases and studies you will hear throughout the meeting, from Copernicus, from others, from simple folks who take action in their lives. So, as we go through the next few days, I always like to tell people, 3 days at a meeting can save you almost 4 hours on Google. But the idea here is this: not in this meeting, not in this meeting. The uniqueness of the people in this room, and I'm not just saying that because we usually say things like that, is special. These are the people in the room that you will see who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in this problem. Expanding the range of choice came from a long-standing hero in the world. My name is Gilbert White, and I asked him, where did you get that? He said, I think it was Aristotle. The idea is this: what is the technical range? What does our technology let us do? But more importantly, what is the practical range? What does our communication, our capacity, and our capabilities actually realize in practice? So as we go through the next few days, I want to put up just a few ideas to help us shape our thinking. Understand the relationships between extremes and slow onset physical and social changes, the thresholds and tipping points. Classic case, if you add a drought on top of a background temperature change, what we get is a surprise. A larger event than either piece of that driver could predict. This is a fascinating thing. In the case of the United States, in May of 2012, 30% of the country was covered in drought. Because of the warmth that was happening at the same time, by July, it jumped to 60%. It is nonlinear. It's not simply additive. Design and diffuse smart technologies, yes, and decision support tools and best practices. One of the great things about this meeting is how we learn from each other and what constitutes the effective use of information, working back from people's risks, not simply from communication. Make the link between capacity building and community-based implementation explicit. This, to me, is the most critical in this context. Throughout the work we did in the fifth assessment report, we found many cases of adaptation planning and not enough on implementation. Not that there's sort of a hesitance, but what can we learn from if we do not have cases of implementation? And resource the process as well as the product. We resource products very well, the technology that Christina talked about, but we do not resource the long-standing collaborations that are needed for a changing world. So we assume that something we put into place takes care of the future, but how long ahead? And sustaining this leadership, not leadership simply at the top, but at each node, the many people in the villages and communities that we heard about. These are some of them. What do we need next? These are examples from the southwestern United States, tribal communities. We can draw this picture around the world and pick these folks. But it gets us, it's very seductive to do this because it gives us the impression that we're handling this problem. We're not. This is it. This is all there is. These are from tribal communities around the southwest of the United States, people who are making a difference in the lives of their own people and teaching the rest of the United States the lessons of the past. This is extremely important. I always remember when the first climate adaptive management effort was being done on the Colorado River, one of the elders from the Hopi tribe came up to the Undersecretary for Water and Science, and the Undersecretary said, "We need to think about adaptive management." And he said, "We've been here for 10,000 years. How do we learn these lessons over time?" And I wanted to put these folks up because these are the heroes of the day. So to end, what is our challenge? Sustaining collaborative networks across research, observations, services, and decision-making. But as we always remember, the lessons come from the people living with the rhythm of the seasons. The last slide I like to put up there because it just shows that even the littlest amongst us know that collaboration can get you some water. Thank you very much.